Good afternoon and welcome to the Oxford Biodynamics PLC half-year results webinar hosted by Yellowstone Advisory. We're delighted to have with us today Jon Burrows, the CEO, and Matthew Wakefield, the chairman. I'm now going to hand over to Matthew to start today's presentation.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks very much. And good afternoon, everyone, and thanks once again for your time. I thought slightly different this time. I'd like to clear something up. We've had quite a lot of comments on the cash position, which we gave in the RNS today, giving the cash position at the end of March. We play a very straight bat with our numbers, and even though we knew we were going to get a R&D tax credit in and various grant monies in pretty soon after the period end date, we only book these things when the cash is actually in the bank. So the 3.6 million figure, just as an example, the R&D tax credit was just under £1 million, came in April. It usually comes in March, but of course we didn't book it to April. And the grant money, so cash is currently running around the same levels as end of March. And from that you can impute that the burn rate is probably a lot less than if you work through the numbers in the statement. I just wanted to clear that up because it's something that we've had comment on this morning. As I say, Jon's going to do the main body of the presentation, but we've actually had a very exciting time since we last had a webinar in January. You're probably familiar with the results we had from the NHS prostagram trial, which we've been working on for the last 4.5 years. We published those in February. And, to coin an American expression, we knocked it out the park. The results of the test are just absolutely fantastic. So, again, we've had some one-off costs in setting up a lab in the US to actually really maximize the potential for the PSE test, which we hope we will get out by the end of the year. But look, I'll let Jon get on with it because there's quite a lot to say.
Thank you, Matthew, and good afternoon to everybody, and thank you for tuning in. So let me get to the webinar, and here is the disclaimer. I thought it would be a good idea to take everybody through a snapshot of where we are today, and we all know that we were founded in 2007, and that was out of the University of Oxford. Excuse me, I'm having technical difficulty here with my screen for some reason. Okay, that's probably better. And that we've been on the AIM since 2016. We are a global leader in 3D genomics. And although this is a bit of a mouthful, we have a proprietary automated fast turnaround blood testing technology platform that we've developed over the last 16 years, and we're now commercializing. And as you can see on the right-hand side of this panel, we have a lot of prototype assays that we've built over that time that give us access to large addressable markets where we can impact the outcomes of many diseases. And so the first of these was launched in 2022. That's our checkpoint inhibitor response test for IO response. We've made commercial progress in 22. We've had considerable early adopter traction, which is leading towards the always stated goal of driving peer-to-peer sales. That's doctors actually selling the test to doctors. We had a unique CPT PLA code issued in record time. It was coded by the 1st of October 2022 to be able to charge against. We have achieved through reimbursement very, very good ASPs between $2,000 and $2,500 as an average selling price in the market. That is very good. We told you that our sales were starting at the end of December to really get traction, and we saw very good sales growth in 2023, which I'm going to start showing you on another slide, and that is translated into Q2. We also, as Matthew has said, had some great news around the prostate screening EpiSwitch test. And because of the fact that it is such a massive boon to testing, taking the accuracy of a test from around 25% all the way up to 94%. We are going to launch it by the end of the year, and I'll show you how we're on track for that. And then to add to that, interim analysis, as we told you in November of last year around our ALS or motor neuron disease test, has been validated through the Mitsubishi Tanabe Pharma of America clinical trial. I'll give you a little bit about how that is moving today too. So with that, we are 3D genomic experts. We're advancing personalized healthcare by developing and commercializing precision medicine blood tests for life-changing diseases. We've been very persistent with this, and we've been going through all of the paces that me and my team have learned over the last 25 years as we've done this in other prior professional lives. I'll call your attention to our global offices and facilities around the world. As you know, our corporate headquarters, R&D, and product development is all in Oxford, United Kingdom. We have a commercial team out of Gaithersburg, Maryland in the USA. We're building the clinical testing lab that I'll talk to you about subsequently in Frederick, Maryland in the USA to support the launch of the prostate test. And we have our reference lab in Penang. We have a deep pipeline of deployable molecular diagnostic tests, as I've mentioned. Those are all protected by a very solid patent estate of 18 patent families. And very importantly, we're a member of the foundation of the NIH of biomarker steering committees. This may seem like a nice to have, but I believe it's actually really essential. Dr. Akulichev, Sasha, our CSO, is on that set of committees. He's the only diagnostic expert on those committees. That's very meaningful. And those committees span from oncology across the board of medicine through neuroscience and metabolics. And it's through the FNIH and their Partnership for Accelerating Clinical Treatments, PACT. We've been awarded 2 grants in the last 2 years, one in 2021 for the analysis of primary and acquired resistance to ICI therapy, which piggybacks our CERT work, and one in 2023 to look at immuno-oncology triggered hyperprogressive disease. This is where people given checkpoint inhibitors actually die more quickly than if they hadn't been treated. These are designed to bring this platform to market as an industry standard for 3D genomics. And we're very, very happy to have been validated in that way. We are the world's leading 3D genomics technology. We focus on linking 3D genomics to clinical outcomes. And you can see on the right-hand side of this graphic, one of the string network matrices that shows how we're able to see the regulation of, in this case, if you see in the red box, the CD274 locus, which is the genomic locus which carries the PDL1 and PDL2 genes, which are the genes that checkpoint inhibitors are affecting. We have the largest curated 3D genomics database, over 500 million data points. And all of the, this has been put into context with our proprietary bioinformatic tools for 3D genomic analysis. Now, I should point out here that artificial intelligence is really becoming all the rage. It's been around for a long, long time in various guises. And we all have heard about ChatGPT and what it can do. That's just the tip of the iceberg. One of the things that we do with our database is we have scraped all of the genomic data out of the sequencing databases that are publicly available. We have also taken all of the curated data from PubMed, which is where all the major publications over the last 30 years in genomics have been made. And those three databases all talk to each other in our equivalents of what we call the EpiSwitch chat GTP. And this isn't a joke. This is how we can actually have the system ask questions and talk in context with these types of data to figure out the sort of string diagrams and what's really going on with the regulation of the system's biology in these diseases. That's why we've been able to take a prostate-specific antigen test, PSA, with an accuracy of 25%, layer on top the prostate screening EpiSwitch regulatory information from our classifier, and actually vault the accuracy up to 94%. That's how powerful our technology really is. So we have the ability, as you can see with the check marks, to use our EpiSwitch platform to build blood-based biomarkers that are very important and valuable. We have started with the checkpoint inhibitor response test. I'll tell you a lot more. Prostate screening EpiSwitch is coming very soon, by the end of the year. And our ALS diagnostic and prognostic test is absolutely astounding for those that are afflicted with such a dastardly disease. So how have we brought this new dimension to the genomic space and precision medicine? Well, 4 steps, which, as I've alluded to, has taken us 10 to 15 years to put in place. And the world is starting now to recognize and understand what it can do and how powerful it is. But we have mapped the 3D genome. We've looked and we understand those 1.2 million critical regulatory points. We've built a custom chip of our own based on an adjuvant array technology that can probe that map and ask questions and tell us where we are and how the genome is regulating that disease in that person. We have built from that the largest 3D genomic knowledge base, which allows us then to ask questions and to build these powerful molecular tests for precision medicine. We've, as I've said earlier, have a very deep pipeline of blood tests. And if you follow the wheel on the left-hand side, counterclockwise from the ICI response test, which is our CERT test, down to at 6 o'clock, prostate cancer screening, through ALS, colorectal, canine lymphoma, which is our vet med, and even our rheumatoid arthritis work that is still continuing with our academic grants and collaborations from the University of Glasgow. You can see that that is what is currently happening in our product development facility in the UK to make sure that we're not a one-trick pony and we can continue to capitalize on prostate, colorectal, veterinary medicine, and rheumatoid arthritis and ALS. And as you see, prostate has come to fruition earlier than we thought. I'll be telling you about the implications for our business a little later. But I want to show you how we have reduced to practice the technology platform. So within 3 days now, you can go from on the left-hand side, receiving 2 mils of whole blood, to extracting it in an automated and reproducible way, to amplifying the signal through qPCR from the DNA, and then analyzing it with our secure algorithm that's in the cloud and producing a clinical report. This allows us to have blood tests, not tissue tests, that can be turned around rapidly in 3 days and to report straight to the doctors very important information to help them determine what is of best benefit for their patients. This test, as you know, is our flagship test. It's the EpiSwitch CERT. I cannot stress enough that it's a fast turnaround blood test. This is very important and something that the doctors are very happy to have. It tells the oncologists which patients will respond to checkpoint inhibitors. It's the only predictive blood test that will determine a patient's most likely response to checkpoint inhibitors. And the tissue tests, which are the issue for doctors right now, cannot do this. CERT is fast, it's accurate, and it's easy to use. And as you can see from the panel in the bottom right, very easy to order. So let's talk about the commercial update. You know, at the end of December, we had achieved these results and we reported those in January. And you can see when you look at the blue orders tested in the top graph that we had started to break through 10 to 20 to high 20s in orders with just 1.5 really salespeople. You can see the run rate from a low in October had started to really take off and get well above 1. So what's happened since then? Well, this graph, which I'll take you through, is what's happened. And sales growth has increased in Q1, as you can see on the graph, where the blue is the number of orders. January, February, and March, we hit 30. February is a short month, so our run rate was still very good at 1.42. March, we hit 40. In April, we broke the 50 barrier. That was a record. As I said before, our reimbursement is very high, off a very good list price at $2,240. And so what we've been able to do is post since November a series of milestones where over 100 total orders were achieved as we did our initial early adopter sales approach, which is stage 1, to 200 orders being achieved very quickly by the beginning of March, to the 300 orders now being achieved even more quickly by the middle of May. We're on track in May to continue this trend. And what this has allowed us to do is to move from having just field sales happening to having peer-to-peer, that is doctor-to-doctor sales occurring, where what we've been doing this month is a series of clinical advisory board meetings from November to Florida, where we invite one of our power users, and I should mention that we now have 30 doctors regularly ordering tests. And what we've done is we've asked them to come and talk about their experiences and invite 6 to 10 of their colleagues who will want to use this test and want to hear about how it can benefit their patients to sit in these clinical advisory boards. And what we do is we invite those doctors to listen, as you can see in this picture, to Dr. Akulachev and Mr. Gill, our CSO and COO, about the test, how it was built, how it works, how you can order it, the logistics, and then move over to the clinician who presents at least 3 cases to his peers about how he's using the test, how he interprets the results and integrates those results into his calculus for treating his patients going forward. This has always been part of our stated sales approach. I can't put enough people on the street to talk to doctors in the way that I can capture a doctor selling this to other doctors. And now that we have enough, we have 30 of them, and we're pushing towards 50, as we had stated in past results webinars. We're starting to roll this out so that the doctors themselves become our sales force. We expect that we're going to start to see the results of this in our sales in the coming months. So switching gears to something very exciting on the back of this is our prostate screening test, which will be our next commercial launch. Where did this test come from? Well, as Matthew mentioned, we've been working in the background with various groups in the NHS and Imperial College Healthcare, with the doctors in Norwich that are in, along with the Imperial College London doctors, the Hammersmith doctors, the Charing Cross doctors, etc. We've been running prostagram and looking at patients. We've published on this, as you can see on the left-hand side, and if you've been following our publications, these have been very important in getting and building an EpiSwitch classifier that's both, as you can see on the right-hand side, diagnostic and able to stratify patients, which is what's coming in the next part of prostagram. And so when prostagram read out earlier than we expected, as you can see here, we ended up with a test that has a positive predictive value of 93%, a negative predictive value of 95%, and a overall accuracy of 94%. Now, considering that in the UK alone, there are 11 million men between the ages of 50 and 80 that really need a PSE test, not an inaccurate PSA test, where 80% of them will be sent to have a heinous biopsy, with many, many of them having complications that isn't needed. We have now moved the bar. We have a rapid, accurate, non-invasive blood test that can save men and their families the angst of the biopsy and save the healthcare system a considerable amount of money. We've published this, as you can see, in the Cancers Journal as a peer review with some of the prostagram doctors. And we've pushed, as you can see here, to lease a space, put the necessary hardware from the robots to the PCR machines to the internet systems in, started to train the staff. We are actually going through tech transfer right now to put the test into the lab and get the lab CLIA certified. So some details around this, both logistically and then commercially. First of all, the lab is on schedule to become a CLIA certified lab that can run the PSE test by the end of the year. The way this works in the US is that we put together the validation package during the tech transfer of the test, following the blueprint under the CLIA amendments. And then what we do is we send that dossier to the Department of Health in Maryland and ask for a CLIA number for our lab. We immediately will be given that CLIA number. That then allows us to be inspected. That inspection may take up to 18 months. While we're waiting for that inspection, we are a live lab, and we're able to go ahead and actually sell this test directly to physicians, oncologists. The implication of this is massive for our company. In the US market, there are 25 million PSA tests done every year. If we can capture even 1% of that market, we are looking at $25 to $50 million in revenue at a price point of the test being $100 to $250. I believe that the CPT code dossier that we're putting into the payers has very compelling data and health economics information in it that can show when we compare PSE to just PSA, which costs between $80 to $150 to administer, is being used up to 3 times by doctors because it's so inaccurate. The data doesn't change, but they do anyway. So they're spending $250 to $450 per patient to have an accuracy of 25%. For the same and more, we can administer the PSE test and capture a significant amount of revenue for the company. This validates the EpiSwitch platform even further. The fact that the payers already understand the EpiSwitch platform's abilities through the CERT test can do nothing but help us. The fact that actually doctors that don't use the CERT test will see the PSE test, where the value proposition is very well known even by the patients and their family members, let alone the doctors. That will help also to galvanize, we believe, the CERT sales. So we have a perfect storm occurring here. And I'm very, very happy to be able to report this to you. And I can't wait to be able to report to you next January where this is all going. To finish, I want to give you a little bit more good information about our ALS diagnostic and prognostic test, which has been validated in the MTPA clinical trial. As we reported last November, the readout, the interim analysis by Massachusetts General Hospital and Dr. James Berry showed everybody that our classifier correctly diagnoses ALS from other neurodegenerative conditions, that it also identifies ALS patients as fast or slow progressing, which is a massive boon to them because it can save 12 months of uncertainty and get them on a therapy much more quickly, which when you know that the average lifespan of somebody who is diagnosed with ALS can be between 2 and 5 years, this is very important. We recently, in May, went to the ALS Summit in Boston. Sasha, Dr. Ukulichev, gave a plenary entitled Liquid Biopsy with 3D Genomic Biomarkers as a Clinical Tool for Diagnosis, Prognosis, and Disease Understanding in ALS. We had significant interaction with the pharma there, Mitsubishi, Amylyx, who's now in the mix, Biogen, Brainstorm, many academics, and the ALS patient advocacy groups themselves. Now, this is what we call an orphan indication, and that means that it's less than 250,000 people in the US. It's about 30,000 people. Around the globe, it's several 100,000 people. But it's another validation of the fact that EpiSwitch can turn its hands to the most difficult to answer and entrenched questions across medicine, and it further solidifies our position as experts in 3D genomics. One thing I'd like to share with you, since I have a couple of minutes, is at the end of the ALS Summit, we had a patient advocacy board. We had 4 patients join us through Zoom. 2 of them had been afflicted for over 2 years, could only talk through voice synthesizer. One of them, a young mother with 3 children who has familial ALS, whose father died from it, whose cousins were afflicted, who got treated very, very quickly, is doing well and was very articulate. Our goal is to get people onto drug more quickly. A year is a really big deal for these patients. So to summarize, we are global leaders in 3D genomics with our proprietary platform. There are large addressable markets which we can impact. We are beginning to do that. Bringing a brand new technology that's almost too good to be true into a marketplace that's been entrenched in the type of genomics that looks at single base changes in sequence is a lot more difficult than you would think. You've all stuck by us and watched as we go through the early persistent grind mode. We've got through it. We've had that early adopter traction. We've got the code and the reimbursement. We've been able now to transition to the real peer-to-peer sales where the doctors are selling this to other doctors, just something that you just cannot do with a sales team. We're seeing very, very good growth in Q1 that's translating to Q2. The fantastic upside for the company going forward is not just the revenue engine that we can push through CERT, but also how we can layer on top of that, leapfrog the company forward by commercializing the prostate-specific EpiSwitch test. And the motor neuron disease is another validated example of the power of what we're able to do. So I'm going to stop there and thank you for your attention and take questions.
Brilliant. Thank you, Matthew, and thank you, Jon, for giving us that update on performance. Encouraging to hear the progress on the CERT test and the early start to launching the PSC test later on this year. And just as a reminder, if you want to ask a question, please type it into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Let me start here on the CERT test, Jon. And the question is, I acknowledge that the specificity, sensitivity of the CERT test is good by industry standards. However, if I was a cancer patient, I might be deterred from taking the test if there is a 10% chance of benefiting, even if the test predicted no benefit. Is this an issue? And if so, how do you counteract this? I'm trying to understand the resistance to wider adoption.
So I think there's a couple of issues getting mixed up here, to tell you the truth. The fact that we're 85% accurate and IHC test is 42% accurate, basically not as accurate as flipping a coin, really does move the needle for the patients and the doctors. What we see in clinical practice is really interesting. And the more and more we have these peer-to-peer advisory groups, we don't just inform other doctors through the doctors using the test. We learn. And one of the things that we've learned recently is that many of these doctors use existing test modalities that are out there, like the IHC, like the gene panels from Guardant Foundation Medicine, the MSI scores, the tumor mutational burden scores. And this was astounding to us to find out, was that they order all those tests because they just need to know something, anything that can differentiate for that particular patient and lead to a beneficial outcome. And what they're telling us is that they can wait for those tissue-based tests and even the blood tests for all the data to come in, and it can take them up to a month. And none of it gives them significant information that has any predictive value. They look at our test and now they're beginning to find out about it. This hits the other issue, but let's take care of this one first. And we consistently from blood, turn the data around for them in 3 days from receipt of the sample. And the data is predictive. That's massive for them when they put that into the rest of their calculus for the patient. Now, the second issue brought up in the question really is, why haven't the numbers taken off? Why don't more people know about this? How do you get the word out? And it's a great question, right? And it's something which we're well aware of. So getting more people to know about it is actually quite difficult in a noisy world where everybody is hearing that this here and that there and all the rest of it. You have to differentiate yourself. You have to go directly to the people who need this test. They're oncologists, they're physicians. They're really busy people. They don't have time to listen to you. If you tell them that there's something that's better than sliced bread, they've heard it all before. This is why getting them to understand what we do as an integrator of regulatory information with genomics, even though they're very intelligent people, well-trained, is difficult. This is why the strategy for building a usage of 30 to 50 doctors, and now we've hit 30, and getting those case studies, that clinical validation through experience, that clinical utility that the payers and the doctors can look at, and then having the doctors talk about it to other doctors, is where we start to move that needle and get that access, because that's really what's going on. I don't think that people know this, and I should explain it. In the US, before COVID, it was starting, and during COVID, it occurred, and then it's carried on. There's a national database now for salespeople where you have to sign up to go and see a doctor in their office. And depending on what medical device, pharmaceutical, or diagnostic you're selling, you get access to that office once, twice, or 3 times in 90 days. This is insufficient for being able to bring a new technology into the forefront of people's minds, let alone get them to use it. So the approach we're taking is a tried and true approach that I've used at Chiron, at Ventana, at Oncology, at Oncoplex, and it works. It does take a little bit of time. However, we're starting to see how it's flipped to the peer-to-peer sales stage. Now, I know this is a long answer, but it's very important to understand. That's why it's a great question. With the prostate test, people already understand how important it is to get a blood test in a man over the age of 50, and for it to be accurate in its ability to tell you, do you actually have suspected cancer or not? And should you go further? That's not the case with SERT. IO drugs are much newer. They're a specialty, and the information for the doctors has to be absolutely solid before they will act. That's why other doctors can make them act better than any sales team could. I'll stop. I could go on, but thank you for the question.
Brilliant. Thank you, John. We're going to stay on the CERT test. Question here. How many people have you recruited to sell the CERT in the US? What regions do they cover? And how many people do you have in total selling CERT in the US?
So if you'd asked me that question in April, it would have been a different answer to what I'm going to give you today. So we're selling the test nationwide. We're concentrating on the Eastern Seaboard from New York to Florida. We actually do have people in Ohio who have ordered it. We have people that are very interested in it. I have a sales team of 4 people backed up by a customer service team of another 5 people. I also have Sasha, Tom, and Joe, our CSO, our COO, and our VP of Clinical Diagnostics. I also have Rob Heaton, my medical director. As I've said, they have now started to push the 30 doctors that use our test. We've had the first 4 of these, and we'll have 2 more in June, sell the test for us. I consider them to be our sales team. That's the whole point that I've been trying to get through with our peer-to-peer sales strategy, which, as I said, works and reaches further than any number of salespeople on the ground could. That's why we've been targeting 30 to 50 doctors. We've been targeting 100 tests a month. What we've found is that we've hit 50 tests a month and 30 doctors, and that's sufficient to trigger now going into that next sales phase, where I believe everybody's going to be selling this for us that's using it. It's going to be very exciting.
Thank you, Jon. Again, just staying on the CERT test, can you provide further information on sort of CERT orders by oncologist? Is any one practice dominating orders, and how many oncologists have ordered again?
So in the early days, the Florida physicians obviously were the first movers on this. And we did have a doctor down there, Dr. Mammus, who's actually part of now our Genesis project, which is collecting information to put into our dossiers for the payers and our health economic readouts, who had ordered more tests than anybody else. What we've got now, though, out of the 30 doctors we have, a good half a dozen or more doctors who have ordered over into double digits, 10 to 20 tests, and continue to do it. The data are showing us, and this is part of what we call our extra high volume strategy within the peer-to-peer, that we're concentrating on the doctors who have ordered consistently to get them to order more and more and more consistently, while also influencing their peers. This is how we're growing.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jon. We're going to move on to the PSC test for prostate cancer. The first question is, how much is the prostate cancer priced at? The PSA test may be inaccurate, but is priced at around only $25. I think you made some comments about PSA test pricing before, but do you want to just comment on pricing and the pricing of competitor products?
So let's go back to what we know around the payers and how the CPT codes, et cetera, work. So using CERT, just to ground everybody, we have an average selling price between $2,000 and $2,500. That's been achieved by having a list price of $5,500. So we purposely priced into what the molecular tests from the Guardants, the foundations, the benchmarks, if you like, were for sophisticated molecular testing, knowing that we needed to hit that sort of ASP. We're going to do a similar thing for the PSE test. However, what we're going to be able to do then is do it off a benchmark. PSA is kind of a benchmark, but PSA is very inaccurate. And to tell you the truth, if you sent me to Las Vegas and told me to put my money on red and I had a 25% chance of winning, I'd tell you to go away. But if you told me to do it at a 94% chance of winning, I'd say every day. So what we've got to do is we've got to look at a couple of factors. One is, what will the market bear for the economic advantage of knowing 94% of the time that your result is correct? That's an important factor. We don't know what that is. And then also, and I'll tell you how we're figuring it out, we have to look at what sort of volumes are there. So if you look at, and I don't know where the $25 comes from, I believe that's a copay. So most copays in the US for the patient are between $25 and $50. That's not what the payer, the insurance company, is paying for the test. Our data shows us that it's between $80 and $150, and this test is being utilized in triplicate because it's so inaccurate. So based on that data, if we were to put forward our case of health economic savings, even if we asked double that, it would be quite reasonable. We might be able to get even more. Personally, I think what we're going to put an average, a list price isn't decided yet, of over $1,000 for this test. That's because it'll float down and we should be able to get what the test is really worth. And then if you look at volume, if you look at 25 million tests being run, we can do 1% of those tests, that's 250,000. And I'm going to say, make $200 profit, i.e. margin, over the cost of sales, which would easily be capturable if we were able to get $500 for the test. We would be able to bring in $50 million in revenue. Those are back of the envelope calculations that we're looking at to see what's possible.
Brilliant. Thank you, John. Again, on the PSC test, the sample patient group for the PSC tests are quite small. Are there plans to trial the PSC test with larger cohorts?
So this is a question that comes up a lot, and it's because of the difference between genome sequencing and EpiSwitch 3D regulatory biology. So what we look at is thousands of data points from every patient that's been boiled down to the 8 nodes that are really important. And those nodes are anchor points across a locus of genes where there's hundreds of genes that contribute to the regulation of a particular response, non-response, disease, non-disease state. Now, you can't compare that with what you've known prior with genome sequencing, where, because you're looking at rare events, one change in the code, in a mutation that occurs in 5% of the population. And so you have to look at, in order to get 250 cases, you have to look at several thousand, 2,000 to 3,000 patients for genomic sequencing to make statistical significance. With 3D genomics, because every patient, positive or negative, contributes thousands of data points that are boiled down to a classifier that looks at hundreds of genes, as you've seen in our network, in those string networks, we reach a statistically significant number with a lower N, an N usually somewhere below 200 patients. So there's no need to look at thousands of patients. In fact, if you look at our publications, putting more in doesn't change the statistical significance. So the answer is no, we won't be doing that. We already have a test that's peer-reviewed in both CERT and in PSC, clinically validated in a large enough N with a statistically significant p-value, and we're going to go ahead and put it into the market so that patients can benefit.
Brilliant, thank you. Still on the PSC test, do you have a reimbursement code yet, and when would you expect to get that?
So we do not. We have our dossier being prepared to go in. As you quite rightly said earlier, the payers now understand the Episwitch platform. They understand health economics value of tests that come out of that, a la CERT. We're putting all that together. I don't have my CEO crystal ball with me today, so I can't tell you when we'll get it. It may be similar to CERT, it may not, which was very quick. What I can tell you is that we will use generic codes until we get one. But what I expect is, because of the health economic value, we ought to be looking to get it relatively quickly. And I don't think it will be an issue one way or another to selling tests and capturing revenue.
Okay, thank you. I've got the last PSE question here, which is, what's the route to market for the PSE test?
So the PSE test is a very different proposition, right, to the CERT test, because it's piggybacking on the PSA. And it's not just the doctors and patients, but it's the family members, it's the population in general that understands already the utility of having a blood test that can accurately tell a man, is he at risk for prostate cancer and should go forward with biopsies and treatment? Or has he just been overdoing it riding his bike or running too much? Or is it just the age factor where prostates get inflamed and there's nothing to worry about? So you saw from the outpouring of press around our publication of results, there's such a knowledge of what this test can do. We are going to piggyback on that and push a lot of marketing into the GPs and what we call here in the US, the primary care physicians, to add this test into the battery of annual tests that occur for men during the year. And you can see from the US numbers, that's about 2 million men every month getting a PSA test. That's where we're going to go. We're also going to talk to the urologists who are trying to operate on an inaccurate PSA test, which has been pushed forward to them, to get them to retest. This has actually happened already for us with a couple of compassionate cases that we've been compelled to use it on. And then there are the hospital networks, the same people that we're talking to actually on this slide, the MedStars, the American Oncology Network, the Loomises, all of these people, they already know this test is coming. They're champing at the bit to get this test into what they do for the workup of their male patients, because they understand it's going to move them forward, save them money, and save the patient from unnecessary procedures.
Great, thank you, John. We've got the last question here. Progress in the US is very impressive. How are things progressing on other fronts, specifically the NHS?
So again, the question keeps coming back. It's an important question. I really believe that the traction in the US is going to be useful for us when we go to NICE in the NHS with these tests. We're not there yet. Prostate may actually go ahead and accelerate that. And it may accelerate that in a couple of ways. One of the things that I didn't highlight, but we have mentioned in our releases and prior conversations, is that we're not just building a clinical lab facility in the US, we're converting part of our space which is why we built it out in the first place, in our UK lab, to be able to do clinical testing for prostate. And we're going through the necessary licensing and certification for that and building that out. That's going to allow us to offer that test first into the private medicine sector in the US. And you know that many of those doctors practice both in the NHS and in the private medical system. This will help get that information out. And when we feel that we've got sufficient information to get a good hearing with NICE and the NHS, we'll be talking to them. But I think we've still got a little ways to go.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Matthew. That brings to an end today's webinar with Oxford Biodynamics. Thank you very much for attending. And as a reminder, as you leave today's webinar, you will be asked to complete a short survey. It'd be really appreciated that if you could complete that. And also just to flag up a couple of webinars that we've got coming up soon. On the 6th of June, we've got Hercules Site Services, and on the 19th of June, Castings PLC. So thank you very much for attending today, and we hope to see you all soon.
Thanks, Alex. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Alex. Bye-bye now.